Hence the dilemma with lean, right? It's like there are those that, want to take one side of it, there are those that want to take the other, and the answer is always somewhere right in the middle, right?
The answer is both. Take both sides.
Yeah, exactly. Man, it's been really fun to watch all the growth that EBFC has had, and all the international listenership too.
And what you're doing too. Like, this show's good. This is about you, man. This is not the me. This is not going to be about me.
Oh, I know, but no, I love you because you validate everything I've been trying to make up as I go along, and you provide some real world words and real structure to it. So it's cool.
You're doing some good work. Just invite me some more, and I'll keep showing up when I can.
One of the topics maybe we'll talk about is a new term I learned, Nemawashi.
Oh, Nemawashi.
Are you familiar with that term?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. Yes.
Of course. I figured you would have come across it at some point, but I had never known of it before. And the more it was explained to me, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like, the A3 workshops that I do. And a lot of the, this CBA stuff is essentially, a form of like, are we actually in the right place before we go? And the CDX, as we get into the technology and the interoperability stuff, is really all kind of different forms of this Nemawashi that we just keep fighting further upstream, right? As contractors, like, if we could just get in there earlier, we could do so much more.
Welcome to the EBFC Show, the easier, better for construction podcast. I'm your host, Felipe Engineer Manriquez. This show is all about the business of construction.
Today's episode is sponsored by
Bosch Refine My Site is a cloud-based construction collaboration platform that applies lean principles to enable your entire team to plan, communicate, and execute in real time. It's the digital tool that works in tandem with your last planner system process and puts it all together in one simple, collaborative ecosystem. This easy-to-use platform is available in English, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and French, and can be used on desktops, tablets, and mobile devices. According to Spencer Easton, scheduling manager at Oakland Construction,
Refine My Site, in my opinion, is the best, leanest tool on the market for last planner system.
Here's what our users have to say. We've looked at 3 other digital scheduling platforms, and none compare to the straightforward approach Refine My Site takes. From milestone planning all the way down to daily tasks, this program gives every general contractor and their trade partners meaningful collaboration, accountability, and KPIs. Register today to try Refine My Site for free for 60 days.
Today's episode is sponsored by Construction Accelerator.
The design and construction industries come up with and build great things, but we also build and waste in how we do those things, in our interactions, in our contracts, in our logistics. So what does this do for our bottom line or our next project? The best firms maximize their value by removing that waste and only doing what's essential to the work, what makes them money. Construction Accelerator will train you to see the waste and give your teams the lean tools and experience to remove it immediately. All online. Construction Accelerator is made up of 3 to 9 minute videos that can be watched again and again in the field, at the office, and at home, all broken down by topic. Need to learn pool planning? We have videos on the process, how to set up a room, and how to kick off a team. Need to set up a target value delivery project? We discuss all the aspects of TVD, especially cost. Or maybe you just need to brush up on 5S. Well, we have videos on that as well. You can download and print reference materials to use on site to immediately translate watching into doing. Subscribe today at trycanow.com. Let's build an industry, not just a project.
Today's show is also sponsored by the Lean Construction Institute. LCI is working to lead the building industry in transforming its practices and culture. Its vision is to create a healthy and thriving industry that delivers outstanding project outcomes every time for everyone. Check the show notes for more information. Now, to the show. Welcome to the show, Nathan Wood. Talk about a conversation that's just been in the making for too long, a technology-focused conversation. Welcome, Nathan.
I hope I don't disappoint you. I don't know how much we're going to end up talking about technology, but it's okay. We'll see where we go.
We'll see where we go. I think it's inevitable. I mean, we're both, number one, same microphone, just different colors. So, I mean, that's something.
We're definitely right nerds in some effect. Yeah, we're AV nerds, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And we both have the good sense to put on headphones to limit echo.
Yeah, if Chad Pearson's out there, he already knows this, that he is such an amazing thought leader and speaker, but damn it, get a better microphone. It's amazing how, like, one little thing, one weakest link can just ruin an amazing conversation. So hopefully mine's coming in loud and clear.
Yeah, it's coming in great. Sound awesome. Yeah, I just want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, Nathan. Let people know who you are and where they can find you.
My name is Nathan Wood. I sort of split two roles as Executive Director of Construction Progress Coalition, as well as I do consulting through SpectrumAEC. And my lean journey and career journey began with DPR construction, coming out of school at University of Texas, Hook'em Horns, as a civil engineer, and went out to DPR in the Bay Area. Was sort of doused in the fire hose, which was IPD and lean and BIM. I was a sort of dedicated BIM and project engineer at the time, and really just seeing the capabilities in sort of that post-recession lull where there was so much innovation going on just because, frankly, things were slow, and was really at the center of that. And sort of got the bug of construction technology, of innovation, of lean, of kind of really this intersection of all three of those, of people, process, and technology, and led me to do work through DPR's corporate innovation team. Got to visit all the different offices, see a ton of different projects that were not IPD, and understand that you can have successful projects that are not IPD. You can have not successful projects that are IPD, and that's so
totally
much of this
possible.
comes. Yeah, right. It's amazing, right? That it actually does come down to people, and so that's really what I've kind of founded my career on is kind of understanding, recognizing the nuance, the dynamics, the personalities of people, and how important that is to this business, and how impactful that is on processes and standard operating procedures and the technology that we ultimately choose and use. And so, the more that we can get ahead of that and start talking about the people and the leadership and the requirements up front, then we'll end up producing better process and choosing better technology. So yes, let's talk about tech, but I'm always going to kind of bring it back to the people side, because that's where my passion is.
No, I love that, Nathan. Thank you for that great introduction. What you left out, I'll brag on you, is that you've gotten to work on 3 continents. Can you talk a little bit about the 3 different continents you've worked on, and what kind of work led you there?
Yeah. So again, being on that IPD project, which I'm sure you're familiar with as an LCI attendee, is the Sutter Medical Center, Castro Valley. That you almost sometimes get eye rolls with how often that project was being talked about. I think in the early 2010s, and I was probably one of the ones guilty of promoting it. But it really was such a cool petri dish, and we had people coming from all over the world to visit our project, and I began to realize how special it was, the things that we were doing. And so it was a great opportunity when I joined DPR's innovation team. Atul Kenzode, I'm sure you know Atul, gave me this amazing opportunity to spend 3 months in the Middle East with Consolidated Contractors Company, CCC, and Zuhair, their CTO out there, had me at their Abu Dhabi airport terminal project, this massive multi-billion-dollar airport project that I had zero airport experience before, but plenty of BIM experience. And so it was very interesting to come to a new country, a new type of project, a new contract, new people, but a lot of the same tech and a lot of ultimately the same processes and the same data challenges, and seeing how they were able to solve it. And that, frankly, the solution was a ton of bodies. that they had totally different economics of, they could just throw bodies on counting numbers, counting all these things that we thought was so cool in the US. And the reason we could never do it is we can't afford the bodies that it takes for them to count the way that they count. So I took a lot of that knowledge and took that up to Denmark. So again, through the SciFi program in Stanford and Martin Fisher, got connected with MT Hogart up in Denmark and did some consulting through DPR up there. So that was an amazing experience to look at much more design build style projects. But again, the Scandinavian culture, their focus on design, like some of the inefficiencies up there where essentially you would bid out an entire year's worth of design build between a designer and a contractor just to choose one design. and the government would pay both teams to go through this entire exercise for a year. And as a GC in the US, I'm thinking, like, this is just asinine. Like, we would never do this. But again, those are just the constraints of the situation that they were in. And to see, innovation is innovation is innovation. And so how do you come into a new scenario, understand what are those variables, which levers can you pull, which ones can't you pull, and being strategic and being creative about it. I mean, that's what I love to do, and it's been awesome to have those opportunities to be in different parts of the world, see those similarities, and be able to see those differences.
Yeah, that's a rare thing. Like at the airport job, you say you can just, there's the one time probably in our career, like I haven't had that in my career yet, where you can add more people. It just has been.
I think they had 15,000 craft on site at any given time. And I mean, that even just, you look at tying rebar, you'd have one person, their only job was to unroll the rebar ties into strips that were 18 inches long and cut them and bind them together so that the next person could take them. And so it was very much this unskilled craft, and how many resources you had to have because you had unskilled craft. And it was just, again, a very different dynamic from what we have in the U.S. and a very different, power system, but yet at the same time, very interesting parallels to a lot of the challenges we face in the U.S.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too to know, like even going from the Middle East to Europe, as I hear people talking about stories, and we've been to some conferences overseas, the struggles are real and they're the same. It's the same. It's the people struggle. Like you mentioned, the labor, just sophistication or the training is different. There is a difference between a well-trained labor force and unskilled workers. I mean, and there's things that you have to account for. So I think that's awesome. Was there any tech in there that was new to you, or were you bringing ideas? How did you interplay with that? I think
the interlocking thing of all of this was BIM and was sort of BIM being central to 4D schedule and 5D cost, and how do we look at the model as this sort of central place where we can plan and estimate and do everything that BIM is supposed to do. A lot of what folks call digital twin today, has always been, what our vision was of BIM. And so I think that was always that challenge we were trying to solve, was how do you bring that together? And speaking of different countries, I mean, spending time and going to conferences in the UK, and those that come from the BIM perspective, that's a huge discussion of, oh, well, the UK has their BIM level 2 mandates, and they have these PAS 1192 standards, and they have all these things which are virtually copycat and a little bit modified from a lot of stuff that we actually built 10 years plus earlier at Penn State and other places in the US, ironically. But nonetheless, they have a government structure and a public policy that supports why they should do this. And I think so often we get caught up on and get frustrated as construction technologists on why aren't we moving faster? Why aren't we doing this? And they don't recognize all these inherent barriers that have nothing to do with technology, and they have to do with public policy. They have to do with business models, and then just, the natural cultural resistance to change. That's probably what they blame 100% of it on, but really that's just 1/3 of it.
Yeah. And before we got started, Nathan and I we were dishing about the people part and the change and talking about the L word. But before we dive back into the L word, can you tell people what BIM is for those that might not know in the U.S., and definitely 4D?
Yes. So BIM, Building Information Modeling, or model, often confused with Building Information Management, is essentially the 3D representation and aggregation of all the information about a facility throughout its life cycle. So it began really with the early BIM definitions in 2007, and then concepts of it that date back to the early 90s. But it is very much kind of the foundational. I almost analogize it to the internet for the construction project. In the same way, so many of these things you can't do without the internet. So many things that we want to do in the construction supply chain, we can't do without BIM. You just don't know it because it's kind of in the background, and it's hidden behind augmented reality and virtual reality and AI and all these fancy buzzwords today. But really, BIM is at the core of it. And so 4D would be, if 3D is BIM, 4D would be the schedule, the time component attached to BIM. And then the 5D would be both your schedule and your cost. Also called model-based production planning or integrated cost and production planning, all kinds of 4-letter acronyms if the 3 letters weren't enough for you. But I digress.
No, that's good. That's good information for people, because we've got a broad audience of people with different experiences. So I think it's good to always pause and just level set.
And we'll say Building Smart International, all these definitions and everything to find more information. Building Smart International is a great resource for those standards. The IFC Industry Foundation classification is an open standard BIM file exchange, and there are, again, efforts related to standards that exist out there, and we oftentimes forget that they do exist because we're still missing that motivation component that I'm sure we'll be talking about.
Yeah, why do we need standards, Nathan?
No, well, I personally hate standards. It's realizing when we do need them, I'm like, damn it, that's right. I guess I do need standards, don't I?
And I saw I got the chance to get onto your YouTube channel one time, and I saw that you guys you'd run it was a virtual reality meeting in a big room where people were coming into the room as if they were really coming into the room. We got to put a link. Is that link out there still?
It's on the YouTube. Yeah, we'll definitely put the link in the show notes. You got it's definitely one of our most viewed recordings because the value of those roundtables is really showing up to them. The virtual roundtables that we do with Construction Progress Coalition, but we do put the recordings up because as an educational nonprofit, we want to be putting this stuff out there and make sure that people are seeing what's out there. But yeah, it was very cool. Thanks to Jonathan Marsh who turned us on to Spatial.io. That is a great collaboration app, and even since then they've come up with a new update. That what's really cool about it is you can be in a room with say 25 or 50 different people wearing either the Oculus. I've got an Oculus 2 virtual reality behind me, or the HoloLens augmented reality. And either one, you can be in a room and move to different places in the room, and depending on how far away you are virtually from this person is how loud they are. And so it really is as if you're in a room and you can kind of hear the chatter of other people talking, but you don't really hear them because it's quiet until they move on and come up to you, and then it might be like screaming in your ear. So you got to be careful. But it's really cool how they're able to mimic real world experiences through technology. It just every day it amazes me how fast it's moving.
Did you see that accelerating with the pandemic as people shifted to hybrid and remote working, or did it kind of stay on its trajectory of just increasing exponential adoption?
I mean, there's absolutely, without a doubt, a pandemic component to that. I think hop.in is one example of a virtual conference platform that really blew up in the age of like Zoom is great. It can do so much, but I've certainly gotten to the point where I've broken Zoom and it can only do so much. So that it's really opened the world for another platform with larger audiences and doing more interactive things. So yeah, I think whether it's a Spatial or Hopin or any of those, I think the VCs know that that's naturally where the things are going to go. And once it goes there now, it's not really going to go away from it. And so I think it falls in the same category of Zoom and Peloton and all the other pandemics. I would definitely be betting on that.
Yeah, that's I know the Peloton phenomenon really took off. Like I remember even driving around here in California and seeing like these big Peloton semi trucks just as they restock and keeping up with the massive demand for people to start working out from home. And
you're pretty well connected. You got to find out who works within the Peloton supply chain that can talk about the breakdown that happened, do the root cause, and because they recovered really fast on their supply chain issues, and that recovery, I'm sure, was a huge effort that I have to imagine had some agile to do with it, or a little bit of Scrum maybe.
Absolutely has agile to do with it. The companies that can pivot quickly when things go horribly wrong they always have two things in common. They believe that things can get better, and then they have some framework that supports that belief, which takes us back to the L word, the lead word. And I think we were talking about, just people's resistance to change. And even you've been so forward thinking, probably to some people, uncomfortably innovative. Has that ever
That's
been
a great way of putting it. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, I have a lot of people that will come up to me, 3 years later and will be like, man, that crazy conversation we had, like, man, you're really onto something. And I think that I oftentimes have to remind myself and not get too frustrated that I do think, multiple years into the future, and recognizing that you still have to speak today's language, even though you're thinking and trying to live tomorrow's life. And that, if you're the only one living in that future, you're living alone. And so it's only as good as those that you can bring with you to that new world. So just even getting folks to use things like Slack is I certainly haven't found it. If you've found a solution, you tell me like what the secret is to getting people to use Slack. Like I still email people. Like it's easier for me. And it's like, it's the unfortunate reality of that path of least resistance, right? Like as much as I want to, like if you're going to use it, I'll use it. But if you want email, I'm going to use email. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be the whipping guy.
People have no idea like why I'm laughing so hard because
now I really want to know. Yeah. Like there's definitely a story behind this that I want to hear.
We were part of a group of like 25 or 30 different companies come together. We're doing this conference for this nonprofit that I'm involved in. Just check my LinkedIn profile and figure out which one it is, people. And someone on the team said, this was like before the pandemic, so two years before the pandemic, someone said, hey, let's jump on Slack instead of emailing each other because we get too much emails. And then the first time people are like, what's Slack? So most of the people said, what's Slack?
Yep.
4 people out of 25 knew what Slack was when the person had mentioned it. And of the 4, 2 of them had used it. So fast forward 6 months later, 4 people use Slack to make funny comments and have side conversations during meetings where Slack never gets used. It was so much fun though, because so imagine like we're in this big virtual meeting and like most of the virtual platforms have chat features, right? Mm-hmm. But there are 4 people that are chatting in Slack in a private little group. It was
and they think that no one else sees, right? I think that's the other, like the irony of all this is that the fact that we do still have contracts and we have laws. And I heard a story from, it doesn't matter who, of a project up in the Northwest that decided that they were going to use Slack for all of their RFI and submit and kind of like their correspondence with the architect and the GC. And it got to the point where they found a pretty significant design issue and it was in one of the channels and the architect didn't like what was in there. So they decided they were just going to delete the channel. Thinking that would like solve the problem. It's like when we still resort to our old ways of like, oh crap, I've got to hide all my mistakes. We're not going to move forward. Like these platforms are there to make these things transparent so that they can be known so that we can address them. But if we're coming into those platforms inherently, playing the victim or being threatened or having to be defensive, it's going to throw the whole thing off in the beginning. And so it's, again, back to the importance of culture before you do any of these things of like, whether it's Teams, whether it's Slack, whether it's email, like what is the appropriate etiquette for whatever you choose as your tool that's going to work for you, because it's not going to be handwritten mail anymore. Like we're not actually mailing letters. We definitely communicate electronically or digitally in some fashion. Just which one are you going to do, and are people on the same page about it?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And people that don't know, like Slack has an interesting history. It was actually a failed gaming startup. And then they had this good thing about what they developed in their code, very agile code development in programming. I could tell, Nathan, like I nerd down and I read up on
how I built this. Guy Raz. I listened to the same podcast episode. It's a great story. I didn't know that story either until I listened to that. It was really interesting how you can pivot so quickly and where folks come from. And even, one of our members in Construction Progress Coalition, Riven, not to be confused with Revit. Believe me, they know. They picked their name before they knew whoever it was. And long story short, they are this new term, IPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service, is. And when you want to talk about tech, this is the new age of. Well, here's one. Have you heard of Zapier? Do you know what Zapier is?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Zapier is an integration platform as a service. It's an IPaaS. It's a platform that is only there to connect platforms you already have, right? And so there is not much of that for construction. There are those that do it, the Googles and the Apples equivalents of the world that say, yeah, we can integrate with other apps, but usually it's not a Zapier, like a third party that's connecting it. So I think there's a whole wave of that, of Riven and others that are going to be, developing this iPaaS world that really gives us the freedom to have project scrum sessions where we define a better RFI, define a better submittal, and push the button, and that's our workflow. But give us the tools, give us that framework to be able to define that and have that be digital. Like that's my future vision, because I know even still today I've got the magnets over my shoulder, and I know we need that analog freeform creativity to really get that agile sense. But at the point where we can both come up with our data requirements, but also do it in a truly agile way, I think we've actually solved the problem. And that's what I'm striving towards.
No, it's a beautiful endeavor that you're on. You're on, and you picked a big enough thing, Nathan. I'm so proud of you. Like, number one, you said like where you, like, my heart melted.
Well, you're actually doing it though. I speak to it well. You're the one actually practicing it. So kudos to you.
I realized, people ask me, like, why you always look so busy? And I was like, I'm not busy. I focus on what my purpose is, my philosophy. That's where I focus. And then, so I have to do things. I have problems to solve in order to get better at living that philosophy. And that's why I'll reach out to things like Zapier and create Zaps to help in some workflows and just to take, like, I use an app that helps to do some scheduling. I mean, and we're using an app right now just to have this conversation. I mean, all these things that I do, like, if we had to do it the other way, it'd be tedious. It'd be like a flight to Denver, which I know it's going to be late. And then, because it's just so busy.
Yeah.
Your airport's incredible, though. But
you just gave me a flashback. To
Yeah.
the whole podcast box and everything. And like, I used to carry so much crap when I travel with me. And now it's like, why? Let's just do it on Zoom and record it here. It's amazing how much easier that is.
Yeah, I was like, and even people push my limits. Like, I was with Jason Schroeder, who has the Elevate Construction podcast, and we were in Salt Lake City, Utah's airport. And we had like 20 minutes until the next flight. And he said, hey, why don't we do a podcast right now? And I was like, hey, I don't know if that's a good idea, but we did it. And I told him, I said, I'm only doing this just to prove to myself that, yes, we can do it. He did it, got it, uploaded it before we took off. That type of like cycle of quickness it blew me away. And I said, okay, you can record podcasts in an airport. It totally can.
Absolutely.
But where you melted my heart, Nathan, going back, you said, I think really long term into the future, and I'm living myself into the future. Can you talk more about that philosophy? That's never been spoken before. That's the first for this show.
Oh man, I think that's the first time I've actually said it that way. So, so now you're gonna make me backtrack and explain what I meant by that. And I think probably when I said that, I was channeling my many of my conversations in the last decade with Sasha Reed. Which if you haven't had her on, you definitely need to have Sasha Reed on from Procore. But I think there's
agreed.
There's this
Sasha.
Yes.
If you're listening, Sasha,
side note. Yeah. Side note.
Yeah. And
I'll have like 4 more of those.
I got to meet Sasha at a virtual culture academy with Procore. And I've got just off camera, there's like all kinds of Procore merch, like all over here that you just can't see it, but it's all over. And Sasha is incredible. So like I agree. You have good taste in friends, Nathan. Absolutely.
So this was 2015 Autodesk University in Las Vegas, and I just left DPR and started SpectrumAEC and was talking to Sasha about what I wanted to do, and the big thought in my head was, you know what this industry needs? It needs construction therapy. And I told her that, and like the look on her face of like, oh dear God, don't you dare do this. Yeah. And now today, 4 or 5, who knows COVID, how many years it's been, but that how often that comes up and how often people joke, and I think, hey, that's actually really true and really fun. And that back then, 5, 6 years ago, that would have been completely taboo. But that with everything, with mental health, with everything, just the whole, literally our culture has changed. And so I think it's cool to take that step back, to look at videos of what you said, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and realize that, I'm actually saying the same thing I was back then. It's just with completely different context.
Right. And I think to some degree, like I met Sasha so Procore is a technology company for project management. Procore does not sponsor the show, but I went through Culture Academy. So Procore, a technology company, is teaching construction professionals how to modify, change, and improve their culture inside the company. They do it as a series of workshops and some meetings, and there's things that you take away and you have to do, and then they keep in touch with you. But I think Sasha came and got to talk to us one of those days, Nathan, and she, in my opinion, is acting like a construction therapist. 100%. And she's really good at it.
Oh, she's the best. I've learned all my tricks from her for sure. and that is, I mean, that's what happens when software companies reach that sort of elevated state of really we've done all we can do, and now the industry needs to do its part. So all that's left to do is help them do their part, which, the L word, it could mean a lot of things. It could mean leadership, right? And kind of like, what is the leadership that is needed to really drive this stuff, and starting there, and then letting that fall into lean, and then fall into standards, and then fall into technology.
Yep. And then the best L word, the love. Put the love back into construction, right?
It's all about love. Well, because it's all about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, Sasha talks about that all the time. Of once you got your food, water, shelter, basically you're getting paid, right? Like, as a business, your Maslow's is, are you getting paid? Then above that is the relationships, right? It's that love, that security, all those aspects that lead you towards that elevated flow state, the self-actualization that we all strive for. But love is a huge component of it.
Well said, Nathan. Well, look at that. You're like a technologist, but you're posing as a technologist. You're really a psychologist and a philosopher. I mean,
my podcasts are like Adam Grant, organizational psychologist, Simon Sinek, Brene Brown on vulnerability and courage and leadership. Like that. That's the stuff that I get off on and think is everything that this industry is missing, because I've gotten plenty of fill of technology, and it'll continue to grow, but it's the whole psychology thing, and especially the behavioral economics, and the whole go into Daniel Kahneman and prospect theory and Robert Thaler and his nudge book, and kind of this whole idea of how do we nudge people in the right direction rather than whipping them in the right direction, which I think is a lot of the tactics we use in this industry. There's so much we can learn, and that's often my challenge, that I get identified or labeled or whatever as more of a technologist, but really I've elevated beyond that. It is more about psychology and leadership and culture that then leads into lean standard practices and all these models and frameworks that then leads into a CBA to choose the best technology that meets those needs.
No, I really appreciate that a lot, Nathan. And Nathan, with my appreciation of what you just said, can you talk a little bit about the name of your company, SpectrumAEC? It's a very interesting name.
Yeah. One word, SpectrumAEC. When I first told a colleague, Lori Spittler, it took her back to one of her LGBTQ groups and was like, no, you don't want to do that. But at the same time, like, diversity is such a huge component in a lot of what I preach. I mean, our tagline is "We build people." And that, we didn't want to be a lean consultancy. We didn't want to be a BIM consultancy. We didn't want to be any of those things. We wanted to be the precursor to that, the Nemawashe, as we were talking about earlier, of preparing the soils for planting to get those organizations or get those project teams ready to go through a much more intensive, much more structured lean framework Scrum session. That frankly, I'm a little bit too scatterbrained to be a good Scrum master. I'm a great participant, but I know my limits.
I'm going to tell you right now, Nathan, that knowing the framework like I do, you're a natural product owner all day long.
Totally.
You.
I would agree.
100%.
From what I know.
And we need good product owners out there. We definitely
yes,
do.
and even like teaching others how to be a product owner, right? Because like being a product owner means being vulnerable and sharing the realities of it, knowing that people aren't going to judge you. They're just trying to understand you. Because too often the customers go into those meetings with some expectation of what they're supposed to say, or it's like the folks that take the Myers-Briggs and always end up with it as an ENFP, which is quote unquote supposed to be like the CEO one. Which like, guys, you can fake your personality test if you want to, because if you have the emotional intelligence to know what the answer should be, you'll give the answer that society tells you to give, rather than really looking inside yourself and giving your honest answer. And so I think that's the key to being a good product owner, is like being honest with yourself, right? And being able to communicate those honest challenges and what you're dealing with, so that those that are solving it can really truly empathize.
Now you're making me flash back to some of the Scrum training that we do. We teach new Scrum Masters like how a product owner loses trust with their team. The first bullet point is they don't tell the truth.
That's a great way to lose trust. Is lie to people.
It's like
we do that a lot in this industry.
We have to put it as part of the curriculum to teach people because it's not super obvious in the construction industry or in some other industries as well. So I love that.
And one of the things, just to the IPD point, because I'm such an IPD fan, but knowing when IPD fails is when folks go into those types of agreements and think that they can still lie and that there's any reason to lie. And it's like, guys, that's why you signed this contract, is to not lie. Like, why would you want to hide something that is not in our best interest to hide? And it was because they were ashamed. And it's like, just getting people's heads through that is a huge, huge wall that this industry needs to get through, frankly, before any of the lean or BIM or technology stuff will take hold. Is sort of that sixth sense, that awakening of like, oh crap, I've been thinking about this the wrong way the whole time. And I mean, that's those are my favorite days, is the workshops when I can see that person that goes to that moment of like, oh crap, I thought I had this all figured out. And you just blew my mind, where I'm gonna have to rethink everything. Like, okay, cool, I did my job. We got one more. We got one more in the camp.
One more. And I want to give a shout out on the theme of one more. Nathan, you just reminded me that we got some really good feedback from a superintendent just today. Shout out to Eddie. Thank you for listening. Your words of appreciation definitely motivating me and Nathan to keep doing stuff like this, helping our industry get better. Eddie, thank you for working to make our industry better wherever you are. Appreciate you. And those little moments, Nathan, like you said, I'm glad that owners that do IPD actually audit the numbers. So, because they're going to tell, like, we're going to hold ourselves accountable. We're going to audit this with a third party. And, like, let's just be honest. And it's okay to make money. Like, the IPD projects that are successful, people make a ton more money than on the let's fight and hire lawyers. When we have to hire lawyers, only the lawyers win. It doesn't matter if your side wins in the end. You're in the wrong paradigm. You're in a win-lose paradigm. You're in a fixed mindset paradigm. And I know that you're into... you got to be into Carol Dweck if you're into Brene Brown.
Grit, yeah. I bring up her stuff.
And Grit.
Yep, Grit, absolutely. No, that's that stuff is a huge component, and something that, frankly, I need to educate myself more on, because I find myself not really fully understanding that line of Grit, of like, when is it good and when is it bad, right? Of like, because grit is a good thing. I mean, a lot of us in construction look at grit as being a good thing. That's how you persevere. That's how you get through things. But like, at what point does grit become burnout, and you don't realize the inefficiency you're creating because you're masking, you're not being honest with yourself. You're lying to yourself and saying that you're okay when you're not. And that whole just uncomfortableness of starting to have that growth mindset. I have to say, I was in one workshop where an older gentleman actually called out on the slide that I had up of explaining fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And he challenged me as to why is it so bad to have a fixed mindset? Like, why can't I have a fixed mindset? And at the time I was very taken back. I mean, I think I would probably have a better response today. And that's what those workshops are for. I mean, I learn as much from them as the audience does from me, but there's so much to that point of accepting what it means to really have a growth mindset, and accepting other opinions, accepting diverse generations, diverse genders, diverse opinions from different stakeholders. That's so much at the core of what's missing in this whole innovation process.
Yeah, and I think just to steal your brilliance from earlier, it's a spectrum. You're going to have some people that are too growth mindset, where it's like almost obnoxious, and you'll equally have on the spectrum, going around the circle, the obnoxious fixed mindset people. And I think for a better outcome, especially when you're doing future thinking, you got to have both. You need to hear both voices so you can really understand where are we and where should we go. And people flex. And there are some things where I act in a fixed mindset, and there's some things where I'm totally growth. And for the most part, I think people would incorrectly classify me as whatever they think it is, because I'm too in the spectrum for you to classify me in one way.
Well, and actually, the way you just described that, I would say that's not fixed and growth mindset. That's thinking fast or thinking slow. Daniel Kahneman, right? You're using your first brain, your quick, reactive, instinctual, because you've trained your brain well to do your non-thinking reaction and response, versus your slow thinking would be taking that time, being a growth mindset. Is this, rethinking and questioning yourself and reassuring, that would be the slow thinking. So and I'm sure if you ask Carol, ask Ann, then they'd probably say that there's overlaps between the two. But I would say that, it's more of a slow and fast thinking in that case.
Yeah, slow and fast thinking, or just diversity of thought. We need more of it. We need the spectrum. I want the full spectrum. The full spectrum AEC.
Yeah, and which means A, E, and C, right? And
right.
Whether it's conferences, whether it's project teams, like my goal is to be doing these types of agile design thinking Scrum workshops with project teams, like with the owner and the contractor and everyone that has already gone through some sort of a culture academy, or they've gone through that organizational transformation. But I've found myself now doing a lot more of this organizational transformation, because that really is the precursor to being able to do these projects. But again, it's like being always a few years ahead. My goal with SpectrumAEC has always been to help project teams at the intersection of A, E, and C. But for right now, it seems to be mainly trade contractors, MEP, and general contractors, and those technologies that serve them, that are raising their hand saying, we know what we don't know, and we want to work together to learn more about it. So hopefully that'll continue to grow to owners, and then make its way down to the project level.
Yeah, we're seeing massive shifts. Like you mentioned, all these lean tools that you're good at and you're doing workshops on, but then you're also focusing on the culture part, the people side, and living up to your philosophy of building the people up for your organization. I think it's important to note that there is a shift in the industry. It's been happening for a little bit, like you mentioned, and we're spending more time, like, of all the things that you offer, it seems like you're mixing in the culture part, the soft skills part, probably every time. Is that a safe assumption?
It almost has to be, yeah. And a lot of this has been, a COVID pivot. You talked about, agility and stuff. One of the things we did with Construction Progress Coalition, because we were primarily an organization that focused on going to live events and conferences and having meetups at those bigger events, whether they were technology, Autodesk University, or Procore Groundbreak, or an AGC IT forum. But now that we had to go virtual, we said, okay, well, we're pretty technology savvy already. Let's figure out what we can do with Zoom. Let's figure out what we can do with these breakout rooms. And really was able to take over what was that void of the kind of interconnection and folks turning on video cameras, something that was an unheard of thing to do, pre-COVID, that nobody would ever, even I wouldn't really turn my camera on unless it was some sort of a meeting where it was accepted to. I think it's interesting how, again, that much that culture has shifted to allow these things to happen. So the more we can use these opportunities like COVID or this new stimulus package or whatever else as, these silver linings to help us drive forward what we really need, which is some level of standardization that also somehow makes our lives easier. So I can think of a bunch of, iPhone and other, examples where that's happened over long periods of time, but it's really hard to do that in the B2B world, and especially within AEC.
It is, because it's very disconnected. The industry remains very disconnected and siloed, just the nature of how things are procured, delivered. And there are 11 million people in the U.S. working in construction. And I heard the stat for worldwide, it's 1 out of 6 people are in the construction supply chain, one way or the other, from, owners that are serial builders to developers, real estate folks, support groups, technology companies. That's all in that 1 out of 6. It's a massive number of people on planet Earth changing our environment every day. And I think I wanted to ask you about what would you offer some advice to somebody that's struggling to make a change in their organization, Nathan? Because you've been a change maker.
Well, I think you're going to have to clarify for me which persona we're talking about. Are we talking about an executive leader, a middle manager, or a fresh young out of college greenhorn?
Oh, now that I have
that's a different answer for all three.
Yeah, now that I have a menu, let's start.
Door number 1, 2, or 3.
I'm going to go with the door in the middle. Let's go middle management. Somebody who's been in the business for about a decade and they're struggling to make a change on their project. What would you tell them?
I would look at and do a root cause analysis. I think a lot of times when we struggle and oftentimes play the victim and try and point fingers at why we can't change something that we want to change. What I try and do is I try and look at, is this challenge that I'm facing internal to my organization, meaning it's coming from executives down, or is it external, because I'm most likely a project manager, coming from my project owner, and it's sort of this rift between what my executives need internally and what my project owner client needs externally. And so often that rub happens sort of at that intersection. So the more that they can articulate in a business logic the impact and the waste and the frustration that they're facing, and not just have it sound like complaining, but have it be more of a compelling message and a story of, well, what I've learned through my research is that through each project, with this amount of time spent by each project manager, equates to X number of dollars of waste every year that our company faces. Like, I would like to propose that we solve this problem by doing X. And it's like, who's going to say no to that when there's an extremely compelling business case around that? So for those middle managers, it's, follow the money. That as much as I hate that, because I'm not that type of person. I'm not motivated by money. I'm not in sales. I'm very much the mastery of skill person. That's like, hey, just pay me enough so that I can go be creative and I'll be happy. And a lot of engineers are that way too. But knowing what those motivations are and using them to your advantage, that's really the emotional intelligence that allows you to move up in organizations. Because at a certain level, it doesn't matter how technically savvy you are, if you don't have some level of business and psychology and emotional intelligence, you can't continue to move up in the organization. You can't get the changes that really ultimately you want.
No, that's great advice. And Nathan, you're hitting on a trend that's happening right now in the industry. There is a record-breaking number of people quitting their jobs in organizations where they're leaving in droves because the emotional intelligence of the leadership in those organizations is low, and people have just said, I'm not going to put up with this anymore, and they're leaving. I just heard a statistic at a conference last week that the attrition rate, or the turnover rate in construction, is like 5% per month currently, according to labor statistics here in the United States, which means like for every 100 people on your job, 5 people are going to quit every month, like just because like they're done with the industry. And we have like over 1 million unanswered job openings, and the number's growing. I just saw an article in Yahoo Finance today that this is the hottest employment market in the history for employment markets. So now, what advice?
So you're saying I should go look for a job? Is that what you're saying?
No, you have a great job.
I do have a great job.
So what advice would you give an executive with your experience? With your experience, like if there's an executive firm that's trying to implement some technology and their company's struggling to get adoption, what advice would you give them?
Culture. I think that's why, frankly, when you talk to Sasha, I know what she'll say about Procore's Culture Academy is that the customers were coming to them saying, we don't know how to retain and grow our talent. That was actually their biggest challenge, and that they saw Procore's ability to grow just exponentially. And it's like this company in Carpinteria, just south of Santa Barbara, which frankly their airport is a lot more sizable now than it was before, but you wouldn't think of as like some business tech hub, right? But yet they can cater all these people and set up the appropriate, remote work, and they have a culture that is more accommodating for this new digital remote work, kind of flexible, results-oriented work environment culture. And so the more that those in the executive positions resist this natural tendency towards this newer way of thinking, this newer work-life balance or life-work balance, as we're all calling it now. I think, if you're frustrated with it, but yet you're not willing to change your own practices internally, well, I'm pretty sure that's that fixed mindset we were just talking about, right? It's sort of like, I don't know how to help you other than until you're ready to admit that you have a fixed mindset, and that is a bad thing. Like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like, it's a natural tendency. We all have, natural deficiencies and we all have natural tendencies, but that fixed mindset is more or less driven by fear. And so much of what is our inability to grow and to innovate is driven by fear. So the more that we can understand that and get rid of it, I think to your point on the transitions and the number of turnover, I think a lot of that is the fact that because so many are remote working and they realize that working for another company really isn't any different because you're not commuting to a different office. You're not really doing anything different. So it actually makes that barrier of grass is always greener, or fear of the unknown less, because it actually isn't that different to change jobs, and especially when the pay is more and there's competitive marketplaces. So I feel for the executives out there trying to hire, and all I can say is, change your culture, recognize, where those blind spots or those legacy policies are, get rid of them, and tell people that you used to have them and you don't have them anymore, and you're going through a change process. And that vulnerability is extremely appealing and will build a lot of trust with those folks. And I think you'll get some great folks on board.
Yeah, I like that honesty too, that you're talking about opening up and just being honest about you're in a change. You're in a change process, and it's going to be clunky. It's not going to be perfect. But if leadership tells people, like you're advising them to, and I think that's fantastic advice, Nathan, like, hey, we're in a change. Like, we used to have it this way for one reason or the other. We see that it doesn't work, and we're trying to shift to something that works for us. And the us is like everybody in the company. It's the executive and the people. It takes everybody to build. Some of the things we do are just very complex, and one person doesn't have all the skills to pull it off. Love that advice, Nathan. Thank you. I don't know the cutting edge technology stuff. Like,
don't say blockchain. Whatever you do, don't say blockchain. Drink.
Okay, I got to take a shot. You said blockchain.
Yeah, it is late enough in the afternoon. Yeah. Digital twin's the other one.
Yeah, digital twin, blockchain, Ethereum too. We should talk about it.
Well, okay, so I'll clarify right there. So Ethereum is a specific platform for developing on blockchain that has its own currency, which is the Ether, that is different than Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is purely a financial transaction, more or less a bank, whereas it doesn't do things like smart contracts. And Ethereum is something that essentially is the intersection of smart contracts and payment systems, and would compete with something like an IBM Hyperledger, or Corda is another system. So just like you've got Procore and BIM 360 and Nuforma, you've got these different systems and that, but they all fall under the umbrella of blockchain, which is a distributed ledger technology, DLT.
And then we don't have Amy Marks on here, so we don't have to say all the modularization acronyms, which they're like, we need an entire encyclopedia.
Industrialized construction. Yeah. Don't make me quote it, because I'll screw it up, but she's done a great job. And that's been a fun kind of back and forth discussion, that to watch her really solidify those different categories of, industrialized construction that go from, the individual components to multi trade assemblies, all the way to your volumetric and modular. And I mean the whole Advancing Prefabrication conference, where I saw her last down in Dallas a couple months ago, like the conversations of just what is the defining separation between those different categories. I mean that's a big discussion that those that are experts in it are still having. So it's still very much a new frontier for those. But the big acronym these days though is DFMA, Design for Manufacturing and Assembly, which is, again, BIM enabled, but a huge component that I like to talk about within the larger industrialized construction and prefab is this need for DFMA as the Nemawashe to prefabrication.
And I was telling Nathan before we got started that I don't actually speak Japanese, but I read a lot of books, and these Japanese words will come out. And the first time I saw Nemawashe was in John Shook's book about managing to learn the A3 problem-solving process, which I absolutely love, and it's just out of reach. It's always close. It's 3 feet away, but I can't lean over and grab it. And can you tell people, because you said you just recently learned what Nemawashi is. What does it mean?
Yes, credit to Nick Massey at Haley and Aldrich for educating me, and we're going to be doing an upcoming roundtable that the recording will be, again, on YouTube to look at. But my understanding is, again, preparing the soil for planting. So what is the foundational elements? What are this sort of the pre-planning efforts? In our world, it'd be a lot of the pre-construction, right? Before you're going to do that hard work, what is that necessary preparation? So, the more I hear and understand how Japanese culture and how the original lean culture defines that, it aligns a lot with our cost influence curve and a lot of these, arguments for IPD and design build and the use of BIM to be able to do preparation and do more preparation earlier, so that when you actually go to fabricating, when you cross that boundary of realization, that you're much more prepared. So I think it's that recognition that while some people may look at that as unnecessary effort and waste, it actually is the necessary preparation that allows you to truly be efficient when you hit the big impactful construction phase.
Yes.
How'd I do?
Yes,
I don't
yes.
know.
You did.
Yes, and.
You did perfectly. I don't even have to even use an and. You nailed
Pop
it.
quiz.
Prepping the soil and getting ready. A lot of the innovation that comes out, you mentioned some great schools. You got an amazing background. University of Austin, Texas.
Hook 'em.
And then you mentioned Penn State. Did you study at Penn State, or are you just a fan of the work coming out of there?
Yeah, I did not study. I was colleagues with Shane Goodman, who is actually one of the co-authors on the Penn State BIM Guide for Owners, and John Messner, who leads up that department there. I'm friends and colleagues with him. And so they're really kind of pioneers and leaders in the industry when it comes to BIM standards and BIM adoption. So I've been to Happy Valley. I've presented on campus before, but did not attend there. And then definitely a big Stanford fan as well as you go to the West Coast, and everything that Martin Fisher's doing with SciFi is just, really phenomenal, cool, kind of leading edge stuff of what is possible in a laboratory environment. And so I love to see what they can come up with, but then I'm always challenging. I'm like, okay, but that's in a laboratory environment. Show me a real world project where that works. and then we're back at the same social problems that, I like to play in.
That's a good pedigree. So, with that prepping the soil, like a lot of the technology foundations, come out of research or startup companies, trying to solve problems for business problems. So I think, there's a little bit of resistance in the construction industry with people saying that lean is too academic.
But that's the great inflection. Real quick on that, though, is the Generation X realization, that waking up point of, oh shit, the boss that I've been listening to and building my career the entire time has a vision that is going nowhere. And what do I do now when all I've ever done is look up to my boss? And you actually have to look down to the millennials that have that leadership spirit, have that drive. Again, it's not me saying that. That's the scientists and whatever social scientists saying that. And it's Gen Xers going, okay, I'm in a leadership position. At what point am I going to reject what those above me have always said and start listening to what those below me have said? It's like listening to your younger brother, younger sister. You're like, even if you're right, I don't want to hear that.
It's like, I hear the right
I don't want to hear that from you,
but it sounds wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
So disagreeable.
Yes, but I digress.
Thank you for the clarification. So you've got, people resisting it, saying it's too academic, but hasn't research and testing things given us everything we have today? Well,
so my maybe this is a response, maybe it's not, but my rub on lean construction is the over productization of the last planner system. And sort of this oversimplifying what lean really is into this, oh, well, if you just do these, few things, then you're doing lean. It's like, well, not exactly. I mean, that's a step one, but I would argue no. And so I think, but because anything other than the last planner system is academic, I think that's why it gets that rub, or that's why it gets, it's perceived that way. But I think that there is so much, especially because of technology, that through that intersection of what is agile software development and how that's kind of injecting its way through software into the industry, I think that we're consuming lean. We just don't even know it. We're consuming it in all these other ways and shapes and forms, and through the apps that we use, that folks may be using Trello and have no idea that it's based in all these Kanban and other, origins. They're just using Trello. And so I think that's where we will see it get greater adoption, and that the perception may always continue to be that lean is academic because it is the academic side of it. And that by the time you are implementing it, it's not actually called lean anymore. I don't know.
That's called business.
Yeah, it's just called business. and those with the lean designation should love that. Like, we should celebrate that, right? It shouldn't be compartmentalized. It should just be embedded within what you do. That, it's just part of business.
I'll drink to that, Nathan.
Yeah, cheers. Drink.
You said agile, so I had to drink one for agile.
Yep.
One for lean and one for business. People entering the workforce now, and even some of the interns that I've gotten the privilege to speak to some high school students as well, they have no fear about adopting lean. Zero. They are fearless. At least the students that I've talked to, they learn some of these concepts in school, and they hear about how things used to be, and they probably also hear their parents complaining ad nauseum of how not fun work is, right? So they have this good, realistic contrast. But what about those people in the middle that are a little bit older? They're not going anywhere. We have 5 generations working in construction, Nathan. What about the older generations that might be afraid of lean? What would you offer them as a good entry point to expand their horizon or just get a little exposure that's not last planner system?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, my first question would be, like, let's really dive into what you're afraid of. Like that sounds like there's a lot more there to unpack. That's a whole therapy session right there, right? But I mean, besides that fact of like unpacking, why do you want to do lean in the first place? I mean, like, because there are a lot of different reasons, I think, why folks do adopt lean. Some of it is truly bottom dollar driven. Others, it's more of like a kind of a cultural, this is how we want to drive our culture, and that they have better retention and other things, through that. I think that there are a lot of reasons why someone would want to adopt lean. And if the term lean, if it creates too much of a stigma, just change the name of it. I mean, or make up a new one. That's why I made up CDX, Common Data Exchange. I mean, really all it is, a work structuring framework for project data interoperability between systems. And so it's taking a lot of the stuff that is very academic and very lean, but by not saying the word lean and just, creating little footnote references so that if anyone really wanted to dig, they can know that it is, because they should know that it's lean. But I think if we actually underemphasize it and just kind of continue to spoon feed it through technology, that we can have our cake and eat it too. And I'd actually like to talk more about the rift between lean and technology. And maybe
Let's do it.
It might have been where you're going. It's like, why is it still perceived like lean and technology can't be one and the same, that you have to do it tactile for it to be lean? It can't be technology. Do you feel like there's still those that state that? I know you don't agree with that.
I just heard that today. Like, I did when the pandemic hit. I mean, for people that don't know, I used to think, because that's how I learned, that you got to do it very tactile. And, reflecting back on this with my mentor, Jeff Sutherland, he said, you've got to give people the experience. That's the important thing. He's like, what the experience is not as important as the experience. So whether it's like with physical paperwork or different technology, I mean, the paper
or an
is
iPad
technology.
with a really slick app on it. Yeah. Like as
Exactly.
long as you're providing the
Language
experience.
Even language, Nathan, is technology, because you can't read my mind yet. Not yet. But I know you're thinking about it. And so I think you're onto something. There's definitely a rift between, there's like a camp of people that think that it has to be completely analog. And then there's a camp that thinks it's not cutting edge or it's not good enough if it's not completely digital. Go ahead and unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. And so I always look at, because I strive to be digital, and I'll give a quick backstory, because the Common Data Exchange, CDX, that we've developed through Construction Progress Coalition, it started as, again, magnets, physical magnets on whiteboards, because we were going to conferences, and you do need that. I've got post-it notes right here that I still use analog, because when you're in that free thought, the technology actually is a burden and it gets in the way. But I think part of that is because the technology is not good enough to be better than what that analog alternative solution is. And so that tells me that technology needs to get better, to be more intuitive and more flexible for those scenarios, so that it feels as if you're doing it in that analog state, but yet you're still getting the benefit of capturing that data and capturing their profile information, all those things that would have to be typed in by someone later when you're registering them, but it's already registered. I mean, that's the beauty of this. And the same reason why, books that, Jeff's Red Book and Steve Jobs' biography and the dozen books that I've actually read in my career are all on my iPhone, all on my iBooks. And I love that I have that point of reference to go back to, and I have all those highlights to go back to and all that searchability. And there are folks that will tell me all day long and 10 times on Sunday that they have to have a paper book and they have to have that feeling, because that's the experience that they get. And I get that. I can empathize with it. I don't agree with it. Like, I don't feel that. So I think half of it is recognizing when is that okay? And then when are other times when having that feeling is actually selfish and to the detriment of the team? Because that's that whole, balance of continuous improvement and respect for the individual, like, yes, we should listen to the individual that's complaining about not liking what they're being forced to do, but do they actually understand why at a higher level, from a continuous improvement standpoint, we're doing this in the first place? And so it's like both can be right and both can be wrong at the same time. And it goes back to this dilemma of lean. And I think why people get so frustrated with it, because it isn't a cut and dry. It's not Catholic right and wrong. It's very Buddhist sort of culture and mentality of, well, it depends. And a lot of the folks that are fixed mindset that need that yes, no answer, they don't like 50 Shades of Gray. They want that black and white. And that, again, is something that I can't help them. All I can say is the world is changing, so you can either go home and retire or you can change with it. I don't know. It seems harsh, but I've kind of got to that point now.
And he's still very young, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry, I'm not sorry.
Young. He's already sorry, not sorry. Putting song lyrics in. This podcast has had everything. It's had song lyrics. It's had philosophy. It's had way more psychology than I would have ever imagined. I love it. I love it, Nathan. Nathan, you have been a pleasure to have on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with us on technology, psychology, SpectrumAEC, and one more time, their nonprofit.
Construction Progress Coalition. So yeah, let me know when I can come back. This has been a joy and a thrill to have this conversation, and keep doing what you're doing. I have to say, yeah, of all the lean podcasts, I do listen to yours because I feel like we're closest aligned. I have a lot of grudges with the lean community as much as I empathize and love everyone there. I as you can tell, I get frustrated as a millennial.
That's healthy. That means that there's something.
It's a healthy, yeah. It's a good drive.
And Construction Progress Coalition. I love it. It's a good
ConstructionProgress.org. Yep.
ConstructionProgress.org. Good place to find them. You're giving back and you're sharing so much. And people, go find his YouTube channel. We'll have the links in the description below, so you can click on it, subscribe. There are some fascinating videos there. I watch their videos. I'm subscribed. So I recommend Nathan's work to everybody.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
And don't be so scared of the tech. It's inevitable.
Very special thanks to my guest. I'm Felipe Engineer Manriquez. The EBFC show is created by Felipe and produced by a passion to build easier and better. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, everybody. Let's go build.